Hi friends! We all know how hard it can be to study kanji when we start learning Japanese. So today I will give you an honest review about the Kanji Look and Learn workbook. There's also a textbook that comes along with it, but since I haven't used this one so much, I will only briefly talk about it. The workbook was released by the same publisher that actually also published the Genki books, and it's also the Genki Plus series. So it's kind of designed to complement the Genki books, but you don't need the Genki books to use this one. The workbook is designed for people who don't use kanji in their native language, and it actually has 512 kanji from N5 level to mostly N3 level. There are also a few N2 kanjis there, but not as many. The textbook mainly teaches you kanji through mnemonics, so little pictures that kind of explain why kanjis are shaped a certain way. And they also come along with a little sentence that is supposed to help you to remember like the picture and also what the kanji means. It also teaches you the right stroke order of the kanji and can also serve as a kanji dictionary. It also contains around 3,500 kanji words, and the words that are relevant for the JLPT level are shaded in gray so that you don't have to study like every word when you go through the book for the first time. The workbook, on the other hand, provides space for you to practice writing the kanji and recall the kanji vocabulary words. It also teaches you how to use kanji in context and contains little texts that use the new kanji you've learned in previous chapters so you can review everything. The textbook is split into the following parts. First, it teaches you the 16 most used kanji radicals that you should know to make more sense of the kanji you're going to learn. Then it has 32 chapters with 16 kanji per chapter, and it shows you around 2 to 3 new kanji per page. At the end, it provides you with 4 different indexes. First, the stroke count index, then the reading index, the kanji shape index, and also the vocabulary index. So a lot of ways how you can look up the kanji you're going to learn. The workbook, on the other hand, is not teaching you the kanji radicals, but it is also split into 32 chapters with 16 kanji per chapter. And each chapter is split into 2 parts with 8 kanji in each part. The first part of the chapter contains a kanji practice table with 5 different squares to write the new kanji. Then there's a table with the shaded vocabulary from the textbook where you have to fill out the reading in hiragana and also get an example sentence that uses the kanji word so that you get a better feel for how you can use the kanji word in context. Then there's 1 or sometimes 1.5 pages of fill in the blank tasks where you either get the hiragana for a word and you need to write the corresponding kanji, or sometimes you also get the kanji and have to write the corresponding hiragana. So it tests you on both ways. The second part of the chapter is basically everything from before, just with different kanji. But on top of that, you get a text that uses all the kanji you've learned before with some questions to test your reading comprehension. In the earlier chapters, you also get a few exercises that ask you for the antonyms of some kanji words or to choose the appropriate kanji for the blanks according to the pictures. For example, to describe where certain prefectures are located in Japan with the kanjis for north, east, west, and south. At the end of the workbook, you get a double page with the fill in a blank task again, but this time it could contain any of the 512 kanji you've learned using the workbook as your final test. It also comes with an answer sheet that provides answers for the kanji vocabulary table, the fill in the blank tasks, and also the reading comprehension tasks. What I really like about the book and the workbook is that you could use them even if you have never studied kanji at all. Like if you know nothing, you could just start from scratch. Maybe not like me just using the workbook. It would then definitely be a better option to use both of them together. But it doesn't really require any previous knowledge. And it also starts with the kanji for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it really starts from square one. The workbook also comes with really good example sentences that really help me to understand how to use a certain word correctly. And they're not too complex and easy to understand even if you are not that far progressed in your Japanese, at least in the first chapters, of course, because it gets progressively harder as you go along. And I also love that the workbook tests you both ways, so you have to recognize the kanji, but you also have to recall the kanji and how to write them like from your head. A lot of resources, especially for the JLPT, they don't test you on recall. And that's expected because you don't need to know how to write kanji for the JLPT. But I feel like a lot of people only try to study study kanji just by remembering how they look and never really writing them. Of course, it's hard to study the different stroke orders, but I feel like it really gives you a leg up when it comes to the JLPT, because if you have 4 different kanjis who basically look the same except for maybe one stroke that's different, if you know how to write the kanji from your head, you will immediately know which one is the right one. But if you only try to remember how they look, it's really difficult to pick the right one sometimes. So I really feel like even if you just want to take the JLPT, it's still a good resource and there's still value in learning how to write the kanji. And also the fill in the blank exercises definitely showed me that the gap between my recognition of kanji words and my ability to write them from my memory is way bigger than I would have thought at the beginning. And now I know that I definitely should focus more on also trying to recall how to write kanji, because I'm going to language school, so I definitely have to write them by hand. Now I at least know what I should be working on going forward. When it comes to the reading material, the workbook does a really good job in easing you in slowly. At first you only get maybe like 4 or 5 sentences that are really short, and then they get progressively longer, and also the texts get progressively longer. Also you get furigana for only the kanji you haven't studied yet in the workbook. So you can definitely test your understanding of all the kanji words when you're trying to read the texts, and maybe you feel like, oh, there's one kanji word that has no furigana, but I don't know how to read it. So it's definitely a good exercise to see if you have everything in your head before moving on to the next chapter. And I was also really happy about the free answer key, because with the Genki books you have to buy the answer key separately. If you've liked this video so far, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and also subscribe if you want to keep updated with what resources I will be using next for studying kanji, and also my journey to going to language school in Japan. Thank you so much, and let's continue. And when it comes to weaknesses, a lot of the mnemonics from the textbook didn't really make sense to me, because they try to project something into the kanji, like a certain shape or something that I definitely don't see, and I don't know how they came up with it. So the textbook didn't really help me as much as I thought it would be at the beginning. Also, the textbook kind of feels incomplete when you want to use it by itself, because it has no practice exercise, like nothing. I know you are supposed to use the workbook and the book, but when we compare to the Genki books, you can also just use the textbook, for example, because it also comes with a couple of exercises. And if you want more, you can buy the workbook separately. But when you want to use the textbook from like this Genki Plus series, you are basically forced to also buy the workbook. And even though I really like the workbook, it also has some minor weaknesses, because the order in which the kanji are introduced is sometimes a bit odd, because I think in one of the earlier chapters, for example, the kanji for pig is introduced. And this is a kanji you don't really use a lot. Of course, it matched the contexts from the other kanji that were introduced, but I still feel like it's a bit pointless to learn it in such an early chapter. The workbook also states that it contains 192 N2 kanji, but to be honest, I don't think that this is true. I also looked them up in the Jisho dictionary, and the supposedly N2 kanji are basically almost all N3 kanji. So I don't really know how they think those are N2 kanji, but then again, there's no real kanji list that classifies the kanji into the JLPT categories. They're just the might be such a level kanji list. So I don't really know who's wrong in this, but it seems a bit odd to me that if you only learn 512 kanji, that basically 200 of them are supposed to be N2 kanji if you start from N5. The workbook also advises you to get a separate practice notebook, because it's just not enough to learn how to write the kanji from memory in 5 squares. The workbook retails in Japan for about 1,200 yen. But of course, if you buy the workbook overseas, it will be a lot more expensive. But there could be also really affordable bookshops accessible to you that you maybe just don't know about yet. Which brings me to the sponsor of today's video, which is Verasia, or Verasia as I say it in German. I discovered them when I was looking for a place where I could buy the Oji-sama Toneko manga without having to go through Amazon Japan. Verasia is an online bookstore bookstore that offers Japanese textbooks, manga, art books, and also Japanese stationery for really affordable prices. And it has over 6,000 different titles. So there's definitely a lot to choose from. A lot of times they're even cheaper than Amazon because, for example, this workbook, I bought it in Düsseldorf at the Japanese bookstore for 22.20 €. And on Amazon Germany, it's 21 euros. And on Verasia, it's 17.90 €. So definitely the cheapest option. They have a German, French, Italian, and international website. And the books are all shipped from a warehouse in Spain. Most European locations, the shipping is only 3.95 €. And it only takes 3 to 6 business days. I will leave all the information below in the pinned comment and also in the description box. So their websites and also their Instagram and Facebook pages. So let them know that I sent you over and have a fun time looking through their whole selection. When it comes to the Kanji Look and Learn textbook, you can expect to pay around like 20 to 26 euros. I feel like the prices for the books are really reasonable because when I compare it to the Nihongo Challenge Kanji book, which I did not like at all, when I think about that the workbook costs almost the same as the Nihongo Challenge textbook, it has a lot more value. It teaches you a lot more. So I would definitely recommend the Kanji Look and Learn workbook over the Nihongo Challenge book. When it comes to the Kanji Look and Learn textbook, I feel like you have to decide for yourself if it's worth the price, because if you like mnemonics, then it might be worth having a kanji dictionary where you can look up all the mnemonics, but as I said, for me it didn't have as much of a value, so I feel like for the value it gave me, it was a bit too expensive. When I first started the series, I would go through one chapter of the textbook and just try to look at all the mnemonics, try to remember all the shaded vocabulary, and then I would continue with the workbook and do the fill in the blank tasks and like the whole chapter in the workbook. But soon I realized I didn't really like the textbook and also didn't really need it, so I just scrapped it and only continued using the workbook. And then of course I would go through like all of the exercises, and before I would practice writing the kanji, I would look them up on the jisho.org website, because there you can look up the stroke order of each kanji. And after I did the chapter in the workbook, I went on to Anki and made flashcards for the vocabulary words I wasn't really sure about or that I just didn't know. I also practiced the kanji in a separate notebook because the 5 squares are not enough, as I said. And to get some spaced repetition in with all of the kanji words, I used the Learn Japanese Kanji app, and I also especially focused on the kanji that I had trouble with. I started using the workbook around 2.5 years ago, and I know this sounds like a really long time to finish such a thin workbook, but as I said, it contained 512 kanji, and it was not my only kanji resource. So my goal was only to do like a chapter in the workbook every couple of weeks to kind of recap what I've learned from other resources, or also get some new kanji in that I haven't discovered in the other resources. But of course, if this is your only kanji resource and you have a lot more time because you're not prepping for the JLPT, for example, then you could definitely get through the workbook in less than a year. One full chapter in the workbook took me around like 3 to 4 hours, when I also count the time I needed for making the Anki cards and to practice the kanji in the separate notebook. So if you have 3 to 4 hours a week, I would say you could probably finish this workbook in the 32 weeks because it has 32 chapters. So this might give you a more accurate timeline. So, would I buy the Kanji Look and Learn textbook and workbook again, and would I recommend them? As you might have guessed, I'm not the biggest fan of the textbook, but I would still recommend it to you if you have no idea what kanji are, if you never really practiced kanji, if you are a visual learner and you really like to learn with pictures, then it might be a good resource for you. But again, for me it was not the best, so I would give it 3 out of 5 stars. But when it comes to the workbook, this was actually my favorite kanji resource resource I've used so far, so I will give it 5 out of 5 stars, obviously. As I said, I really like it. I feel like it's a really nice value for money. And I'm also a bit sad that my time with this workbook is almost over. I will go through it one more time to see if there are still kanji I'm not quite sure about, but afterwards I will move on to a different kanji resource. So if you have, like me, previous experience with learning kanji and also used a lot of different kanji resources, I think the workbook would be fine on its own. Let me know what you think about the workbook and the textbook. Do you like them? Have you used them? Don't forget to check out Verasia's website and also their social media accounts. If you found this video helpful, please share it with a friend and check out my other review videos about Japanese resources I've used before. Thank you so much for watching till the end of the video, and I will see you very soon. Bye bye!